What's good, everybody? Welcome back to Talk with Flea. I know y'all wondering why I got the mask on. I got a special guest today, nigga. Straight off the Diddy trial, the Punisher, nigga. My man Sharay.
Would you like to be called the Punisher?
Whatever works best for you.
At the center of this, it seems to me, is going to be the issue of consent. What is your view? I mean, do you believe this was all consensual?
On May 21st, 2025, the name Sharay Hayes quietly entered the official record of a multi-count federal case against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. But in underground circles, Hayes has long been known by a different name, the Punisher. Not a plaintiff, not an activist, not a viral exposure.
He calls himself the Punisher, but his name is actually Sharay Hayes, and he was an exotic dancer.
Hayes is something else entirely. He's the kind of witness federal investigators prize, a working-class professional who didn't even know he was a witness until the bigger picture caught up with him. Before the headlines, Hayes was just a dancer, not the flashy kind on Instagram, but a working-class male entertainer booked for discreet adult events in New York. His work was transactional, mostly harmless, and rarely emotional. He'd been performing for years when a woman named Janet contacted him for what he called a private celebration.
Yo, they called up like they was just hiring a regular party. Cassie hit me directly, said her name was Janet, and said it was her birthday. So her husband said she could hire a dancer. So I just booked it like a regular party.
It wasn't out of the ordinary. She was polite. Her requests were precise. The rate was clear. The only unusual detail was a simple instruction. My husband may be there. Don't speak to him. Hayes accepted the job without hesitation. It was at a high-end hotel, typical of the locations he worked.
So she immediately explains, look, I don't want you to dance. Actually, while you're here, is me and my husband, we like to create a scene. As part of the instructions initially was in creating these scenes, when her husband came in, we were not supposed to acknowledge him at all. I was supposed to act like he's not there. Don't look at him, don't talk to him, try my best to just make believe he's not in the room.
Hayes was welcomed by a woman calling herself Janet, who explained that the session would begin with an oil massage. She handed him a towel, his only required attire, and walked him through the lighting setup. He was asked to stand near the bed, where the angles would be better for observation. It didn't make sense until he saw the man, quietly standing across the room, watching, never speaking. His face was covered, his body was not, and he didn't move to participate. He stayed at a distance, like a director on set.
Yeah, so it's obviously seeing an adult male in a burqa is not something that is normal. It was surprising when he first came out, and remember, I have no idea who they are at this point. And when it's framed to me, Miss Ventura told me we're going to set this scene, we're going to do oil, and my husband's eventually going to walk out.
This wasn't about attraction or spontaneity. Every movement had a rhythm, and every transaction felt rehearsed. Hayes would rub oil across her shoulders and then be instructed to pause. Janet would tilt slightly, readjust, and sometimes step away, only to return with subtle guidance. Move here, shift the light, try again. These weren't instructions from her. They were coming from the man in the corner. Hayes realized that Janet was simply the messenger. The actual authority in the room wasn't touching anyone. He was curating everything. The first few sessions followed the same routine.
And then he would give subtle cues because he's across the room and the room's dark, everything's candle lit. And he'll say like, yo, move a little bit, yo, move the candle, I can't really see, or move the body. And he would never talk to me, not one word to me, only to her. And if it's instructions for me, it goes to her and she tells me. So it was like a real scripted kind of routine. And it really went like that every single time.
So he was basically orchestrating a scene without directly talking to you, but telling her certain things.
Exactly.
Wow.
There was no traditional intimacy during the early encounters. It always began with oil, lighting, movement, and visual adjustment. Hayes recalls how the focus never seemed to be on them, but on how the scene looked. Even when things became more physically involved, the directions remained. Slower, softer, slightly more to the left. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even private. It felt like he was participating in a recorded rehearsal for an audience he couldn't see. But the real shift came on a day that began like any other. Hayes checked into the Essex house, the same location used for prior sessions. He unpacked his towel, set down his bag, and turned on the TV. That's when the message appeared. A personalized hotel screen flashed, "Welcome, Mr. Sean Combs." For Hayes, time stopped.
About the fifth time, we were in a hotel called the Essex House. And when I would arrive for the sessions, I would be waiting around a couple of hours. So in this specific time, they put me into an extra room in the hotel suite. And to kill time, I decided to watch TV. And this specific hotel had a welcome message, which was, so when I cut on the TV, it specifically said, Essex House would like to welcome Mr. Sean Combs.
Oh.
And I was like, whoa, like I was blown away.
The man in the veil, the one who never spoke but orchestrated everything, suddenly had a name. The identity he wasn't supposed to question was now unavoidable. The realization was instant and irreversible. Janet was Cassie Ventura, a well-known performer and longtime partner of Combs. The man directing the sessions, always from the shadows, was Combs himself. Hayes had unknowingly performed under his gaze for over a year. Every interaction, every setup, every strange pattern suddenly made sense. He wasn't being hired for pleasure. He was being hired for visual design, to fulfill someone else's version of control and performance. And the person controlling it had more wealth, influence, and secrecy than Hayes ever imagined. From that point forward, Hayes saw everything differently. The towels, the candles, the perfectly placed sheets, they weren't romantic quirks. They were stage cues. The silence wasn't awkward. It was structured. Hayes hadn't entered a room to entertain a couple. He had walked into a controlled environment, engineered for a specific purpose. And while he wasn't abused, forced, or threatened, he was part of something he could no longer ignore, because now he knew who was behind the curtain. As the federal investigation into Sean Combs expands, a new pattern is emerging, one that relies less on accusations and more on alignment. One witness says she was asked to pose under dim lighting. Another recalls candles placed on only one side of the room. Another, more disturbingly, remembers waking up with pain, then being shown a recording of herself and warned never to speak. In isolation, these details are haunting. But when Sharay Hayes, a man with no criminal complaint and no financial motivation, describes those same details, the pattern becomes undeniable. Hayes' session always began the same way: low lighting, soft music, oil massage. But it wasn't the intimacy that stood out, it was the precision. Candles were relit if they burned too low. Positions were subtly corrected. The woman he knew as Janet, now understood to be Cassie Ventura, often paused the session midway to readjust lighting or body angles. Hayes didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it was eccentric preference. But after hearing testimonies from others, those same details now carry a darker function: visual control, strategic framing, and preparation for potential footage. Unlike some of the civil plaintiffs who say they were filmed without consent, Hayes never saw a camera, but he never needed to. He says everything about the environment, from the curtain placement to where he stood, was staged as if being captured. The man in the corner, Sean Combs, never spoke directly to Hayes. He only gave instructions through Cassie, yet he moved with intention, as if analyzing the visual dynamic of the scene. Hayes recalls feeling like he was being watched through something, not just by someone. That detail has become key in linking his account to others who claim they were explicitly recorded. That's what makes Hayes' testimony so valuable to prosecutors. He is not claiming harm. He isn't suing. He doesn't cry on camera. Instead, he walks through the facts, the timing, the layout, the repetitions with clarity. There's no emotional plea, just technical recollection. And that's exactly why his voice is difficult to dismiss. He didn't need to imagine these sessions were strange. They were strange. And now that others describe the same details in much darker contexts, Hayes becomes the silent connector between experience and evidence. Perhaps most chilling is Hayes' memory of the man's pacing. Combs, veiled at first and later revealed, would move slowly across the room, shifting angles, adjusting its view. Hayes once thought it was about comfort. Now he realizes it was about visuals, trying to capture something unseen. Other testimonies speak of feeling posed, displayed, or arranged. Hayes never used those words, but he describes the same actions: the relit candles, the arranged sheets, the silent oversight. In the end, it's the structure itself that becomes damning. Not any one act, but the machine-like consistency of staging. Now, with dozens of filings under review, federal attorneys say Hayes may be the most credible witness they have. Not because he's the most harmed, but because he's the most specific. His accounts validate others. His lack of personal grievance removes any motive for embellishment. He's not asking for justice, he's just telling the truth as he saw it. And truth, in this case, is enough. Because it's not just about what happened, it's about how deliberate it was, how repeatable, how professional it became. Hayes doesn't claim to be a victim. That matters, because by refusing to adopt the label, he's forced the public to focus on his clarity, not his emotion. He admits to confusion. He talks openly about discomfort. He describes moments where he questioned nothing, then moments where everything became clear. He never raises his voice. He never asks for sympathy. And yet, somehow, his testimony strikes harder than many of the louder accusations already aired on national television. What if the turning point in this case wasn't a scream, but a calm recollection that matches every scream already heard? Even defense attorneys admit, Hayes complicates the narrative, because you can discredit an angry ex, you can question an emotional breakdown, but how do you argue against a man with no axe to grind, no history with the media, no visible reward for speaking? Hayes isn't there to prosecute. He's not there to redeem. He's simply presenting the truth, and it happens to mirror the darkest accounts ever made about Combs' inner world. And for the justice system, that mirror may be all it needs. As the case moves forward, the prosecution now sees Hayes not just as another witness, but as the pivot. His words give shape to confusion. They validate patterns. They connect isolated stories into a repeatable design. Whether or not Sean Combs is ultimately convicted, Hayes has already changed the case. Because after him, this is no longer just a story about rumor or betrayal or jealousy. It's a story about structure. And when structure exists, the burden of proof doesn't feel so far anymore. Because after Sharay Hayes, the story is no longer unbelievable. It's undeniable. So now, the question isn't just what happened behind closed doors. It's how many people saw it, stayed silent, or helped set the stage. What do you think? Is this just the beginning of something bigger? Or has the system been built to survive stories like this? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're listening.